Hi, everyone. Thanks for participating in our presentation entitled Lessons Learned from the Transition to Remote Learning. We want to go ahead and take a second to introduce ourselves, and I'll go ahead and let my colleague lead off.
Hi, I am Andy Golloher. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education at San Jose State University. I'm also the associate director of the Early Childhood Institute, which is a interdisciplinary institute looking at all issues related to early childhood. And I am the RP ambassador, or one of the RP ambassadors for California, supporting the use of the DEC recommended practices across the state.
And I'm Dr. Matt Love. Like Andy, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education at San Jose State University. My research currently focuses on practices related to universal design for learning and the use of technology in the classroom. As part of that work, I do some collaboration with the Inclusion Collaborative around their work for universal design for learning, and I'm also a member of the CAT UDL IRN Professional Learning Network. So again, most of my focus is on universal design for learning and how we can support implementation in the classroom. So I wanted to get you familiar with the goals of our presentation today, share some work that we're doing around the research into the transition to remote learning, something that we're all going through currently, how we're going to share our initial findings, and then how we're hoping to develop some support for you in partnership with the Inclusion Collaborative as this work comes to a close and we look to disseminate some of our findings and support materials. So again, we want to share findings from the support groups, let you know who we interviewed, who ended up participating in our research. From their input, highlight some of the successes and barriers that were noticed in the transition to remote instruction. We also want to discuss the transition. First, we had the crisis response, but then from there, what were the creative teaching solutions we found? How are teachers continuing to innovate in their classroom now in the time of COVID? But then we also want to find out, what can we do moving forward from this shared experience we all have? How can we take what teachers have learned about teaching with technology and move forward and continue to embed things that eliminate barriers for students in the teaching and learning process?
There are a couple of ways that you can interact with us. During our presentation, you can put comments or questions in the comment section on YouTube. After the presentation, if you want to use Sketch, you can access our slide deck and also some supplementary material about the results of our study. And of course, you'll be able to access our email addresses if you want to contact us directly to follow up about our project.
So as we're all pretty aware, we have a global pandemic that's going on, and it's affecting different areas of our lives, both in our jobs, societally. There's a lot going on, and I'm really happy that I got to work with Andy on this project. She really got us rolling and trying to figure out a way to, as university professors and with our collaboration and partnership with the Inclusion Collaborative, how we could, in our roles, support not only school districts, schools, teachers, but also families and students. So I'll go ahead and let Andy share a little bit more about the impetus behind our work and why we're doing it, what we're doing.
I think that Matt covered a lot of it, but we want to highlight that we recognize that nobody was prepared for a global pandemic because we are in teacher preparation and we don't prepare students for a global pandemic. It's not been something that's been on the forefront of our minds. But as we moved through the different phases from the initial shutdown into realizing that this was going to last longer than we anticipated, we wanted to understand both the needs of schools, but also what successes we found so that anything that we can continue to build on once we do end up in a face-to-face setting, we'll be able to do that. We also recognize that in California, we've had a number of events in recent history that have led to school closures more temporarily, primarily due to the wildfires that have taken place across the state. And so we recognize that even though, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're not going to have another global pandemic soon, we might have other reasons that we need to think more flexibly about our use of distance learning to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all students as we move forward. So, this is a brief overview of our project, recognizing that we wanted to get both rich, detailed information and also information from a wide range of people across the state. We have combined focus groups with both school administrators and teacher coaches, and with teachers and resource providers or related service providers in the schools, with surveys to get information about that initial transition to distance learning, and then also the current state of affairs with distance learning. And the goal, again, is to highlight the proposed support solutions and future steps so that way we can support you.
Right. And what we really wanted to do, would you say it was fair, Andy, that the goal was to collect broad data that could paint, a broad stroke picture, but then also be able to drill down and capture individual stories, successes, and barriers that were present in individual school districts, and then try and build those into how we move forward?
People have been being as innovative as they've ever been. And so as people have found solutions, I know nobody has had the time necessarily to go out and share a solution that has worked in their district with others. And so if we do see those solutions that are coming up, those successes, we want to have a way of sharing that news with others. It might work in other places as well.
Right. And I want to highlight one thing that I've kind of learned along the way, and I know we'll share our initial findings, but I want teachers to know that even though you and I are researchers and we think we come up with a lot of these great ideas that we're going to test in classrooms and make evidence-based practice, I'm consistently impressed with what I see that teachers do in their own classrooms, and notice, wow, that's really effective. And there may not be any literature or, empirical evidence behind that, but I can see that it's working, it's engaging students. And like you said, the level of creativity has been pretty high. And while it's probably really taxing on teachers, I'm really excited about where we can go in supporting teachers, but also the ideas teachers can share with us and others. So with that, I do want to share some of our initial findings. Like Andy said, we've talked to administrators, both at the district level, the school level, and then also individual teachers. And this is ongoing, so make sure you do check out our adjoining documents. So we'll post, interesting quotes, interesting findings, any quantitative and qualitative data that we can in our adjoining Google Doc. But I think for the purposes of what we're recording and what we're going to make available to you now, I can share some of what we learned from administrators, and then Andy can share kind of what teachers have been saying in the classroom on the ground. So again, we focused mainly on what are folks in our community doing. We tried to house kind of our data collection and our sampling to the Bay Area, mainly Santa Clara County. And in talking to administrators, it was great to hear that their main priority was, how do I support the wellness of not only families and students, because that's the main job that we serve as educators, but as supervisors and mentors of in-service teachers, it was great to hear that one of their main priorities was, how do I support the wellness, the overall wellness of my teachers and staff? Because undoubtedly this is a stressful time, and all of us are at home. Some of us are teaching our students, also managing our own children's classrooms or learning, and maybe have a partner who's also working from home. So there's a lot of things going on that can create barriers. So just making sure that there's connections and support opportunities, not only for students, but the teachers and staff who serve them, was a great thing to hear from a lot of the administrators. Also understanding one of the reasons they're probably participating in the work that we're doing is they want to find continuing and ongoing support for teachers. I think we all know professional development, professional learning opportunities, and just the creation of professional learning communities is so important, and now more than ever. And just the willingness they have to see, here's how we have to do things now in this crisis response. You know, we're all at home, how do we meet? But seeing their foresight in how can this look in the future? If I have teachers at different sites, you know, do we use that commuting time, or do we use what we've learned and do we collaborate digitally just to save time, be more efficient, and, you know, focus on how can we put more time and effort into our students while also supporting our own professional needs. So from the administrator side, you know, it was really heartening and good to hear that their focus is on supporting teachers who are that gateway to supporting students. So that's what we heard from the administrators. And again, we'll try and provide some more drilled down information in our joining document. So we invite you to view that, but I'll let Andy go ahead and take over and probably share the more fun information, which is what the teachers were sharing from us.
Okay, so the first thing is obviously our teachers have been superheroes. They always have been. But I think that even more so now, the feedback that I heard from teachers was a real commitment to their students, real concerns about making sure that they're doing the best that they can. But echoing what Matt just said, there's a lot of conversation about coming together in more informal ways. So there's been the districts have been offering professional development, but the teachers have found a lot of connection just from each other. And even in the focus groups, as things were coming up in the chat, people were sharing, oh, I can get this information to you, or, you know, oh, you need help with that. I have some ideas. And so I think that there's a real coming together because we've been pushed outside our comfort zones and have really been all facing similar challenges. We did talk to teachers from preschool through transition. So obviously they had different considerations and concerns. So another piece of feedback was really trying to working within the constraints. And I know that understanding IDEA in the pandemic has been a big challenge for districts. Again, IDEA wasn't written with a pandemic in mind. And so issues like how are we going to maintain compliance, is one of the issues in the forefront. But the teachers really discussed that, like, the one size fits all strategy didn't really work. And they asked for flexibility. Some of the teachers discussed having amendment IEPs. So working directly with parents to discuss what is their IEP going to look like in this shelter in place remote instruction. Recognizing that each family has a different set of resources that they can build upon. And each child has a different set of needs. So if you're working with children with visual impairments, a lot of the technology is going to be more challenging since it's so heavily visually based. Meanwhile, some other kids have really been excelling in this space. Many of the teachers discussed the continuing importance of universal design for learning, and that they felt that their universal design for learning ability has really helped them in this time because they were already providing, text with videos, with other means of accessing the materials. So I think that is a major success. I know that districts have been working really hard on the UDL framework. And so it's nice to see that is paying off in this very unexpected time. I'm sorry, Matt, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free. I can keep talking. There's also very generous with their time. both focus groups that we've had have gone over time because there's been so much to share. um, so in addition to that UDL piece and that adjusting IEPs in relationship to what the families are able to implement, a lot of the teachers discuss this very different relationship with parents. And we've always been a field that has valued family support and family interaction. Family members are members of the IEP team. But this has pushed us in a way that we haven't had to go before. So home visiting is a hallmark of early childhood, early intervention. And now we're all home visitors. And so the teachers commented on the real value of seeing what's going on in the family's experience, helping that help them adjust their expectations for different families or their recommendations for different families, trying to find the solutions that work within the family. So kind of similar to that idea of the individualized family service plan that we had in the birth to three world. We can't just say every family should, find a quiet space in their home, because now we can see that not everyone has that space in their home. So what other strategies can we come up with that will support the student? And then on the flip side, there's been a real value for the parents to see their child working in an academic setting, to understand that information that has been shared in assessment reports and in IAP meetings in a very real way. So when the teachers are saying, we need to work on such and such behavior as a precursor to the really rich academics, because of course we're working on the academics. Parents are saying, oh, like that's why you're talking about that so much. And recognizing again that just because the IEP goal might be focused on a behavior doesn't mean that the classroom doesn't include academics. And so that has been a real value and something to consider as when we do eventually go back to face, can we use technology to share the student's experience in the classroom? How might we do that? Of course, we have to value confidentiality as well. So those have been some successes. Another success has actually been in inclusive education, with the way some of the schools have set up the homeroom as being the GE teacher. It's been students have responded to that in a way that they now are going to their general education teacher as their, kind of first teacher, and then their special education teacher for the support that's provided on the IEP. And of course, that's something that we've talked about a lot, but I think that in schools, sometimes a special education teacher in a special education room can be like a real safe space for students. So they might go there first. But if we're moving towards an inclusive classroom, really we want that ownership of the student in their classroom, that they are a member of that classroom, that is their teacher. So there's been successes there that hopefully we can build on as well. Look like you were going to say something, Matt. Did you want to?
You can accuse me of pandering to who our audience is going to be, but in talking to administrators and talking to teachers, I want to drive home your point that teachers have been superstars. So beyond meeting with us after the school day to meet for 90 or so minutes, the extra lengths they've gone to make sure that students have materials, whether it's mailing them to them, doing drop-offs, and even volunteering to hand out meals to students in our community who need those things. And, finding time to meet with families, some of who have said they're actually meeting with families more than they might have been able to in the past. I just hope these things continue to be driven forward and that we find a way to keep doing them when we're in face-to-face environments and kind of meld what we miss about face-to-face environments and what we've learned about digital learning and kind of bring those two things together, because I think that's, what we all envision as being the comfortable medium of, fully supporting students.
Absolutely. the use of technology to get around some of these challenges, just in commuting. um, Anyone who's in the Bay Area knows that that can basically you have to allow at least 30 minutes to get anywhere. And so taking that 30 minutes out of your day means that you can now have more time to spend with the people that matter, rather than listening to NPR, which I enjoy, but isn't necessarily my job. Um, and uh, and then also giving that flexibility to parents. And I think also, considering what we've done recently with the distribution of technology, hopefully that's something that can continue for the families that haven't traditionally had access to the technology, which has been the reason why we haven't been able to move towards Zoom IEP meetings or Zoom consults. But if we can continue that to look at ways to fill those gaps for the families and really addressing the digital divide as a issue of equity in our schools, and that's not just for special education, that is for every student, to be able to have that access. As a parent, I can say I love that the homework is on Canvas because my daughter, who's a third grader, she does not remember the homework that she has. And now I can go back and I can, walk her through it. I'm trying to get her independent on it, but walk her through checking the homework that is in the same place every day. And we are still walking through it so she can find it herself. And so making that sort of connection a little bit easier for families outside of the school day too, because not every parent, especially in this area where traffic is so bad, not every parent can check in with the teacher at pickup time or drop off time in the morning. Um, and then the final point is kind of the purpose of our entire project, was teachers asking for the support that they needed. And I think that the biggest challenge with this is that the support that they've needed has changed. Like, it's changing almost week by week. I think we've slowed down. Initially, it was changing week by week, and now we're in maybe a phase of it changing month by month. And so, where are the teachers at in terms of their ability to connect with students, and with parents? Highlighting again the importance that parents or other caregivers, because some students aren't at home, but maybe they're in a learning pod or in a child care center. But how do we connect with those caregivers to help them facilitate student learning in the way that is needed? Making sure, for example, that they know how to navigate Canvas if that's the platform that's being used. Um, and also, more in particular for students with special education needs, if there's any form of differentiation that needs to be done. That was one of the challenges that I think most of the teachers echoed, is that in our profession, you are constantly differentiating and you go in each day with a plan that you shift and adjust in response to those formative assessments that are so important. And it's really hard right now because your ability to use any sort of prompting strategy is a little bit limited. And then that ability to realize, I have this assignment at absolutely the wrong level, and I just need to bring it down or bring it up to where the student is difficult when you do materials drop off every 2 weeks, or if you're trying to do everything through the technology. And so, really working closely with teachers to find out what are the supports that they need, on an ongoing basis is important.
And then it's where do we go from here? We definitely know that COVID-19 has had an impact. And as special educators, I'm going to try and do what we do best and frame that positively. For sure, we've seen difficulty in delivering instruction, but I'm hoping that we can take some lessons and move forward, because what history does tell us is that when something has a global impact, the globe innovates. We find new flexible solutions, and I'm hoping education does the same thing. Like Andy was saying, none of us were prepared for a pandemic. And I would argue that, yes, IDEA wasn't written for a pandemic, but I also don't think it was written for maybe the digital age. 2004 wasn't that long ago, but if we consider what school looked like in 2004, I remember overhead projectors with transparencies. Those are gone, probably, for a good reason. But now we have information and communication technology like we're presenting with you here. And how can we leverage what we have access to? How can we update IDEA? Because 16 years is a pretty long lifespan for federal legislation. And respond to the needs of our community. And like Andy said, it's hard from a community and a state level trying to match federal law in a time like this, right? So I think updating can take place. And then if we take what we've learned and implement it in the classroom, I think we can see positive gains for students, right? How can we extend the school day or even the school year? I think one of the things we run into a lot is we just never have enough time to address all of students' needs. Or, if a student needs some reteaching, it's hard to find time in the day. I would argue that it would be great to motivate a student to say, hey, at the end of the school day or when you're at home, if you have access to something, here's a quick 15-minute refresher. That's something we want to build in students. That's a studying habit. That's an organization building activity. So something that we can really reinforce with students. What do we know about research about tech? It's funny that we all live in Silicon Valley, but a lot of what we're able to do is driven by what those big companies make available to us. That's just the reality, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how can we as consumers then advocate for who our students are and what our students need? So, again, we're trying to focus on the positives, but I know one of the barriers we talked about for teachers was, what does it look like, or how can I access apps when there are kind of restrictions around what I'm allowed to purchase and what I'm allowed to make available to students? If it's a learning app that costs 99 cents, I know a teacher is going to go into their own pocket to purchase that, but it's hard to ask them to do that frequently. So maybe we can update our budgeting policies based on the lessons that we've learned here. And Andy, I know teachers shared a lot of things with you about some of the issues and barriers. So if you just want to lend voice to that, because I know we're trying to lend that positive voice, but I also want to reaffirm what a lot of people are probably feeling in the audience.
That is absolutely right. So the issue of accessing materials, it intersected multiple issues. So there was one issue was just that any app needs to go through an approval process. That approval process might be slow. And we know that a lot of our understanding and ability to use technology requires playing with it. And so how do you get the app so that way you can play with it with a student and determine whether or not it is appropriate, recognizing that some of the apps are cheap. And so, a 99 cents expenditure might not be cost prohibitive, but it still has to go through this process. Of course, on the other hand, we want to make sure that the apps are secure, that student data is not being sold. And so there's a conflict there that we need to consider. I want to go back to the issue of IDEA because another big issue that came up was assessment. And I think that this has been lurking before COVID is what is the value of some of our assessment strategies? The IQ tests that we might use or the standardized assessments that might be used that we recognize have built-in biases and they don't connect to instruction. And what I heard from teachers was that whatever they did right now, they wanted to connect to instruction. And really that's what IDEA is supposed to do. It's supposed to identify the students' present levels, determine their goals, and then the solutions to address their goals, right? And yet we have some of these clunky assessment strategies 2004 was 16 years ago. So it actually is it's, a student's entire journey through the public school system ago. And so I think that would be something that, as we're looking at our national or federal advocacy, is to really explore ways to make assessments more flexible and meaningful for the eventual individualized education plan. Um, and then I want to highlight again the issue of the individualized that was brought up. So even though about 10 to 15% of students in any school district are going to be receiving special education services, that's a big group of students. Within that group, the solutions for each student are going to be different. And so looking at how do we give that trust to the teachers, because one of the things that came up, and I heard this echoed back in the beginning of the shutdown as well, is that there's a lot of rules for special education teachers. And I think that's because of the fact that we are embedded in this law. And we don't want to be sued, which is a valid concern. But the general education teachers don't have the same restrictions, and it feels to special education teachers like they're not trusted. And also a concern that communication to parents doesn't communicate a sense of caring, where every teacher that we've talked to and every administrator cares very deeply about the students that we serve. But when you get, the 23-page legal interpretation of how we're going to implement IDEA during the pandemic, it doesn't feel like caring. It feels like checking boxes. And so that's where I think that it would be in the next phase, as we're moving into our next phases of this shutdown and remote instruction environment, to think about how are we communicating that caring with both the teachers and the families, to highlight that, as I know many districts at the same time are discussing the social emotional learning and the need to attend to students' emotions. I think caring is the baseline of that. And if that's not being communicated in our official documents, how can we make sure it's communicated?
And I want to continue that push for us to continue innovating. So, what about research on tech is one of the questions we're asking. New technologies are going to come out of this. I think those companies that develop it, so your Google, Zoom, all of those tools that we're using, are going to push out new features. But what research on tech tells us is it's then up to us as educators to figure out how to best leverage those, because they're not necessarily designed, especially for our students with disabilities, they're not designed with them in mind. So how do we then leverage them? And in our innovation, and something we heard from teachers a lot is, let's put our kids first. A core tenet of universal design for learning is, if we put our students who are in the margins first, we consider them proactively, we're going to be supporting all students in the process. So not only is it a goal of universal design for learning, it's a core goal passed down by the California Department of Education, where if we focus on building one system that supports all students, that system begins with the consideration of students with disabilities. So as we continue to innovate and as we look for solutions, I want to ask everyone, in attendance, to continue to consider students with disabilities first, because all students have varying learning needs. But if we're considering those students with the most extensive or varied learning needs, we're going to have supports built in for everybody. And just sharing that idea out with anyone that you can is going to just further that message and that idea.
That statement. I think sometimes there's a tendency to fall back on kind of old school thoughts. There might be in the back of your mind, they might not be fully expressed, but this idea that good teaching is what's working for the middle of the road. But actually, we really want to stretch it. good teaching is the teaching that works for students with disabilities, for students who are emergent bilinguals, for students who are from every background. And so this isn't an extra thing, it really is the first thing that we need to be thinking about.
And as we push those things forward, again, we know teachers are innovating right now. We know teachers are working so hard for their students. And, just to throw one more ask onto their plate, it's continue innovating. Once COVID-19 has seceded, and we all know that it will one day, we're hoping that it's sooner rather than later. Um, when we return to face to face, or we return to whatever school looks like after this, because I do think the digital footprint is going to grow, let's continue innovating. Like I said, a core part of mine and Andy's job is to push forward new and innovative practice, and to conduct research on it. But what we both know is that teachers in the classroom are doing new and innovative things that even researchers don't think of. So finding ways to innovate new practice and then share that out is going to be so important. And some of the areas that we thought were how we deliver instruction, right? There's the adage that the teacher is the sage on the stage, but with technology, we can be the guide on the side, really curating individualized components for students. We talked about extending the school day or preventing the summer slide, making digital learning tools available to students and families over the summer when there's that 3-month gap. And then really clarifying how are we going to use technology in the classroom. We know we want to differentiate, but what can technology do to help us, increase the levels of differentiation in the classroom, whether it's through multimedia, adjustable curricula, or just, web-based programs that can be leveled to meet students where they're at. And then what does distance learning look like in the future? Again, always trying to find the silver lining. I think access to distance learning is actually going to be a boon to students. As someone who teaches at the university, I know a requirement for students, no matter where they go, is to take an online course. And many students leave K-12 never having taken one. So this might even lessen the shock that a lot of students are facing as they transition to the university. So those are kind of my ideas and what we've heard from teachers. But I know Andy brings a much richer knowledge of younger students. I'll admit it's a blind spot of mine. So, some of those ideas are there, Andy, but is there anything you'd like to share for young children today?
So I think that I would add to this list is the continued and enhanced interaction with parents. I know that it's something that has been a challenge in the school system, but I think that we're seeing some strategies enabled by technology to move around those barriers, recognizing that kids are going to be with their parents longer than they're going to be with any individual teacher, and they spend more times with their families than they do in the classroom. Even if we do extend the school day, and I think that is a strategy that definitely needs to be explored, and both in relation to supporting students' learning, but also we've seen now, and I know it's a bit of an uncomfortable area, but it's true that school provides childcare, and so how do we make that part of our education system stronger, recognizing that it's valuable. It's valuable through high school. There is research that shows that teenagers who get in after-school programs are less likely to do things like vandalize or have teen pregnancies because they just don't have as much time to do that stuff. And so that's not my forte because I don't work with teenagers. But I think that when we look at the early childhood system, the new phrasing is early childhood care and education, recognizing that those things go together. I also want to highlight the potential for multi-tier systems of supports as we move back, recognizing that some kids have taken off in this world and other students are just still really struggling. And and having difficulty making connections with the curriculum. And we might need to think really innovatively about what grade levels mean when we come back and how we match students to grade levels, or match students to supports. And that's beyond students with disabilities, but including students who are just struggling. And how can we make use of that time or the technology? I really appreciated that my school district had lessons that extended through the summer, video lessons that were available to any student, that we could supplement what we had done during the school year. Because I also admit that last spring, we were not able to keep up in my household with the learning that we wanted to keep up with. So thinking about how we can maybe continue those models of support outside of the traditional school day would be great.
And again, we want to get to the core of this work. It's been amazing talking to teachers. I think I've shared multiple times. The more times I get to go into classrooms or talk to teachers and administrators, I'm reminded why I enjoy the job that I have, why I enjoy the field that I'm in. Education and the work that teachers do is really the foundation, I think, of our communities and of society. And being able to talk to teachers reminds me of that all the time. So I really enjoyed that portion of the work. But again, a core goal of what we wanted to do was to support teachers who are in remote instruction. It's a new experience for all of us, and we want to innovate alongside of you. So what we're hoping to do, and we don't know how long, again, it's part of that uncertainty, but like Andy said, we're kind of changing month to month. But while we're in distance learning and even into the future, we want to provide you support for a variety of students. Our goal is to support all learners. And what we hope to do once we have our findings is to rapidly and pretty quickly develop supports through professional learning opportunities and professional developments in partnership with the Inclusion Collaborative that help bridge what we're hearing from teachers and administrators and those core stakeholders in schools with what we know about good instruction, evidence-based practice, high leverage practice, universal design for learning, and package those into idea generating professional developments as well as opportunities for you to continue learning and innovating in the classroom. And again, the work is ongoing, so I'll let Andy kind of introduce you to how you can participate. We don't anticipate being quite completed at the time the conference goes live. So, I'll let Andy tell you how we can welcome you into some of the work we're doing.
So if you're interested in participating, you can see our email addresses there. You can reach out to either of us and we can link you to the surveys that we currently have ongoing. You can also look at the materials that we've shared in Sketch to see what we have so far. And also just right now, I believe we have time for questions and answers. Theoretically, oh, I'm sorry, recess is over.
All of us working and learning from home, right?
Yes.
We're in from you. There is time for Q&A. If something strikes you outside of that time, again, our emails are there. We have the Google Doc, and we hope to make these findings widely available. And luckily, through not only the conference, but some of our ongoing work with the Inclusion Collaborative, we can make that possible. So with that, that's our presentation. I know I want to thank you for participating, and I want to thank everyone that gave us feedback and participated in our research. So for me, thank you.
I also just thank everyone for the participation and also for being here today. And I hope that we can envision a transformed future. I'm trying to use the tagline from the conference. We'll transform education.